The comments from Boston Fed Chair Rosengren regarding shared workspaces being a risk to the economy overall is a fascinating one. And it's not necessarily an imminent risk, but it's certainly a real risk. Let's unpack this. He didn't mention WeWork by name, but you know that's who he was talking about because there's really nobody big enough to upset the real estate industry as a whole, other than WeWork. So I'm going to comment about that one. Think about what WeWork is. At its root, it's basically the world's biggest subletter. They rent space, they make improvements, and they turn around and rent it to other people. Effectively, it's the real estate equivalent of the banking's big risk, right? The big risk to banks are they borrow short-term and lend long-term. They borrow through term deposits, commercial paper, et cetera. All sorts of short-term mechanisms, including repos, which we've addressed in other videos. And then they turn around and lend that through car loans, mortgages, business loans, which are longer in term than the liabilities. So their assets, which are the loans they make, are shorter than the liabilities, which they use to borrow the money. WeWork in many ways is doing the same thing. They're entering into long-term leases and then making short-term leases to their tenants, to their subletters. The problem is, as WeWork has grown so huge, it's the largest tenant in many markets. And there's an old saying, if I owe $1 million to the bank, I'm ruined. If I owe $1 billion to the bank and I can't pay it, well, the bank is ruined. And I worry that their presence in the real estate market, and I think this is what the Fed chairman is referring to, Fed governor is referring to, I should say, is that by being such a large outsized presence, by being the largest tenant, if they can't pay their bills, that means there's all sorts of real estate companies who also own their properties on leverage typically through their own mortgages. If all of a sudden their biggest tenant can't pay their bills, you have a lot of real estate companies in trouble paying their mortgages. If they can't pay their mortgages, guess who's on the hook? The banks. And so as a Fed governor, a regional Fed bank chairman, regional Fed bank president, I should say, this is where the systemic risk element comes from and what he's alerting people to. And that is, if you have such an outsized presence, ultimately, if WeWork, who, by the way, more or less has to spend about $2 billion a year to pay its leases, which is where the trouble is coming from with their IPO, if they start to have trouble paying their landlords, then those landlords have trouble paying their mortgages. This could have a systemic effect. It's not imminent, but I do understand it. I think it was very interesting of Rosengren to bring this up, and I do think it's something that is now a background risk to the economy that people hadn't thought about until he brought it up.